Welcome to Spiritual Foundations for Life. This is day number 184. The sanctifying process in our lives is primarily worked out through committed relationships. And there's really two reasons for this. First, people can put on a public faith and give others a false perception of who they are, but they can't consistently do that with their closest friends or at home. Their spouses and their children will see right through those faces. Second, marriage and family relationships were considered lifetime commitments and are considered lifetime commitments, or should be anyway. See, rather than run away from the pressures of living together, we're supposed to stay committed to the relationship and as a result grow up, mature. We're better to learn to love one another, accept one another, forgive one another, and bear with one another than in the crucible of committed relationships, be it marriage or family or just deep friendship. It is critically important to distinguish between who we are in Christ and our role responsibilities in life. When Paul led Onesimus, a runaway slave, to Christ, he sent him back to his earthly master. But then Paul appealed to Philemon, the slave's master, to receive Onesimus as a brother in Christ in Philemon verses 10 and 11. During the time of Christ, a slave was more like a lifetime employee, and he or she often lived better than the self-employed who were very poor. In fact, in the Hebrew culture, many people took on the role of a slave in order to get out of poverty and pay off their debts. In the case of Onesimus, being a slave was his social role, but he was first and foremost now a child of God. This distinction can be clearly seen in Colossians chapter 3 verses 11 and verse 22. In Colossians 3:11, Paul says that in Christ there is neither slave or free. And then in Colossians chapter 3 verse 22, he talks about the role responsibility of slaves. The same holds true of the roles for husbands and wives. Husbands are to respect their wives as heirs with them of the gracious gift of life, according to 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 7. In other words, Christian wives are children of God also and equal, hear me, equal in status with their Christian husbands. However, they don't have the same roles in life. In Titus chapter 2, Paul gives specific instructions for older men and older women and younger women and younger men and slaves. He concludes by encouraging all to live the same godly lives. In a general sense, Paul's epistles are divided into halves. The first half of each epistle is often considered theological, while the second half is considered practical. He lays a foundation and explains how to live it out in life. And unfortunately, the tendency that we have is to skip the first half, the theological half, and just look to the second half for practical instruction on daily living. But without the theology, the result is a subtle form of Christian behaviorism, where people say, well, you shouldn't do that, you should do this. Paul said, do that, do this, don't do that, don't do this. You know, and say, well, this isn't the best way to do it, here's a better way to do it. Okay, that's Christian behaviorism. But, excuse me, committed Christians will try the best they can to follow the rules, but they will often fail or burn out trying to follow those rules. Why? Why doesn't it work for them? Even though the behavioral objective is biblical, because they've not been first established in Christ. See, if we can get believers to fully embrace the first half of Paul's epistles, they will be firmly rooted in Christ, and then they'll be able to supernaturally live according to the second half. The goal is not to get people to act like Christians, but to simply be children of God who live out of who they are and their role and calling in life. Our key point today is that godly character is forged in the crucible of committed relationships. And our key verse, Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dear beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. know who you are in Christ, and then live out of that identity and live as a Christian. God bless you. See you tomorrow for another episode of Spiritual Foundations for Life.